I do a regular live Q&A for my members over on lekelamusic.com, and one of the questions that came up a while back was, why are there three different kinds of minor scales? And it's such an interesting piece of combined music history and music theory that I thought it might be nice to share it. So the best way to do it is to switch my camera angle here and walk you through it, so let's do that now. Nowadays, when we think about different kinds of scales, we tend to think about majors and minors. One major, three different kinds of minors. But if we go back a few hundred years, major and minor scales were really just two of a number of scales that we call the modes. And what differentiated each of these kinds of scales from each other is their structure. So let's have a look at what I mean by that. If we look at the scale C major, take it nice and easy on the white keys, its structure is as follows. So from our first note, we're going tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. If we look at the natural minor, starting on A, we're going to go tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. Now you can repeat that pattern on any key and you'll get the same sound. So if I start, for example, on A flat, for a major scale, that'll go tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And if I want to play a natural minor, I'm going to go tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. So you get the same sound starting on any note if you follow that structure, and each of the modes has its own structure. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to demonstrate them on white notes because that's the easiest for you to see. The first one that we know as the major scale is actually called the Ionian. Next we have the Dorian scale, the Phrygian scale, the Lydian, the Mixolydian, the Aeolian, which we know as the minor, natural minor, the Locrian. Now, apart from the ones that we know best, the major and the natural minor, of these modes, a number of them are still quite frequently used, particularly in folk music, but occasionally in pop music as well. The Beatles, for example, would have used quite a lot of modal keys. The Dorian, for example, is quite often used. The Phrygian is commonly heard in Spanish traditional music. Hear that Spanish flavour to it. So these aren't extinct scales by any means. But over time, the major and natural minor became the most popular, the most commonly used. The major for its bright, happy sound, and then the natural minor gave that sadder sound. But there's a problem with the natural minor. Let's look at our major scale first. When we get to the top of it, between the leading note and the home note again, there's only a semitone. And that leading note pulls very strongly onto the home tone. So if I play that scale and I stop there, our ears really want closure on that scale. So we're listening to hear this. And that's because the momentum builds all the way up that scale, and then because there's only a semitone between the last two notes, that pull is very strong. And that, incidentally, is also why an awful lot of music finishes with the chords 5-7-1, because our 5-7 contains the leading note. So that pulls very strongly in. But if we look at the natural minor, going from A to A, there's a tone between those last two notes. And the pull to the final note isn't anything like as strong. So that was felt to be a problem for composers. And in order to solve that problem, there was an adjustment made to the natural minor scale. The seventh degree of the scale was raised by a semitone, and then that created that nice strong pull to the home note. But there was a problem with the harmonic minor scale, the one in which we raise the seventh. And many of my young students, when they learn this scale first, they'll call it the Aladdin scale because it reminds them of the music of the Disney movie Aladdin. And the reason for that, of course, is that that scale sounds quite Middle Eastern. At the time that these adjustments were being made, Europe and the Ottoman Empire were butting up against each other. And while there was a lot of interest in the Ottoman Empire for its cultural differences, it was felt that to use this scale too often might be referencing that culture over European culture a little bit too much. So another adjustment was made. Instead of just raising the seventh, they also decided to raise the sixth. And that partially solved the problem, but then it led to another problem. This is our melodic minor, by the way. If we raise that sixth on the way up, fine. But if we maintain that raised sixth on the way down, we lose the essence of the minor scale. It becomes diluted. In fact, we're now playing a scale that's half minor, half major. So, how to resolve that problem? And over time, another adjustment was made that we would raise the sixth and seventh on the way up, but return to the key signature on the way down. So that way composers were able to have the best of both worlds. They were able to keep that lovely minor, that melancholy sound, and even that slightly exotic feel without going overboard. Now nowadays, of course, we think of the harmonic minor and the melodic minor as just two ways of expressing music that's a little bit sadder, a little bit more melancholy. But back in the day, this really was an issue. It was something that had to be thought about. And so essentially, that's why we ended up with three different kinds of minor scales. The one most commonly used is, of course, the harmonic minor, particularly for instrumental music, with the melodic minor showing up more often in operatic type arias and so forth. Incidentally, if you want to remember what your modes are, you can make up a little sentence to cover them. I still use a sentence that I came up with off the top of my head when I was trying to remember these for an exam years and years ago, and it still strikes me every time I use it as a really clumsy sentence, but you might use it as well. So we've got Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian and Locrian, starting on each of those notes. So the sentence I came up with was, I don't play like my aunt likes. Which is a ridiculous sentence, but maybe you'll come up with something better, but it does lend itself to that kind of mnemonic memorization strategy. So there you go. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that explanation. And if you're thinking, well, it doesn't really help me learn my major and minor scales, but thanks anyway. Well, I'm going to link a video at the end. You'll see it over here somewhere that has a really handy little hack for making the learning of scales a little bit easier. If you haven't already downloaded my practice workbook, the link is in the description. It's well worth having. It'll really help. And if you enjoyed this video and want to support my channel, the easiest way to do that is just to hit the like button, because then the algorithm sends it out to more people who might also enjoy it. I'll talk to you again soon. In the meantime, happy practicing.